Hello and welcome. I need these a little more, it seems. It's because I am in the dark or the not so light room outside. I can read the comments nice and easily, but as soon as the light's a little bit less, I kind of need these, although they're not great. This is aging, sickness and death as it approaches. Another Uposita has passed, the full moon of March, and we are reflecting on how diligently, how well we're spending our time, or we should be. It doesn't take a few minutes or even just a few seconds to sit before your meditation of an evening, in the morning, and just consider that. How well have I been spending my time? Have I been practicing in accordance with, within the parameters of the Noble Eightfold Path, Sila, moral virtue, Samadhi, meditation, and Panya, wisdom? A quick question, a quick answer. Yes, I've been doing that. Or no, I haven't been doing that. In which case, no recriminations. We just make a determination to, from henceforth, carry on practicing diligently as we can, keeping those 5 precepts and regularly meditating. We will all age, get sick eventually, and die. This is the one truth. This is the one certainty we all have in common. We're all brothers and sisters in that respect, in the Dharma. Some of us sooner, some of us later. Unexpectedly, not so unexpectedly. Who knows? We don't know the future, which is why it's so important we concentrate on the here and now, this present moment, where we can determine not the outcome or the future itself, but certainly determine the conditions by which we move forward into the future, by acting with moral virtue in all of our body acts of body, speech and mind. Doing good will bring about good and positive outcomes, whereas we know doing bad will have the reverse effect. So moving on with that and looking at the first comment or question is, may I know which Thai forest tradition teacher you are affiliated with? I am not affiliated with any teacher or organisation. I took dependency on my upajjhaya, as one does in your bhikkhu ordination, and also have an acharya, teacher, whom are not of the Thai forest tradition, but are part of my sangha, to which I'm dependent on, and we make not a vow but or an oath, but we take dependence on each other. So our teacher takes dependence on us as we take dependence on them. So we make a reciprocal arrangement to assist each other. And that is with the Mahabodhi Society. And that's back in India, so it's not of the Thai forest tradition. The reason I have many associations with the Thai forest tradition is because it is the first sangha and monastery I spent time with and experienced in my own country, back in the UK, England, southern England, on the borders of Sussex and Hampshire. And I've spent a lot of time in Thai forest monasteries in Thailand, in and around and living with those teachers, those ajahns as you call them, practicing as you go on to ask, is it the Ajahn Chahs? Is it Ajahn Chahs? So by that I assume you mean the Ajahn Chah lineage of disciples and teachers and large network of monasteries which is now extended throughout the world, but there are very many in Thailand, and yes, I have spent time there, but I'm not affiliated with any such organisations. What I talk about certainly does come from my listening to Dharma or reading books of those senior disciples of Ajahn Chah in that tradition. So this is where that idea might come about. Okay, we need these now. I have a question. Okay, if anatta, not self, is true, Then what is nirvana? Theravada seems to teach that even consciousness is only a skandha. We've got a lot of Sanskrit words coming in here. So parinirvana really would be nothingness if there is no consciousness after death. So you're assuming rather there that you need consciousness to see nothingness, which is a paradox in itself, isn't it? Anyway, you do say in brackets, when you say, is it true about not self? By that I mean the proposition the self is only a conceptual designation. A lot of big words there in one short sentence. There's no self, this is it. The self is the khandhas, yes, the 5 aggregates, and I've spoken in some detail about that in a talk. If you search on this channel, English Buddhist Monk, Self and Rebirth. It's only 45 minutes long, and I only talk about that. It's not questions and answers. It's just on this particular subject. And continue watching, because I'll no doubt bring this up again during the course of this talk, because it comes up time and time again, not just as a direct question, the way you've asked it, but in coming to the understanding of the nature of existence. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. There we go, that word, anatta, not self, is the third of the 3 characteristics of existence. Where you say Theravada seems to teach that, I must say the Buddha is our teacher. We take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma and Sangha. Now, yeah, the schools, the northern schools, Mahayana, and the southern schools, Theravada, have different views, perspectives perhaps on some of those teachings, but the core and essential teachings of the Buddha are pretty consistent throughout all Buddhist traditions. That is the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path begins with right view, and that is inclusive of the understanding of not self, no self. That this physical body and this thinking brain is just that, those 5 khandhas. Nibbana, as opposed to nirvana, I differentiate between the two, because you may have in the northern school a different understanding of the concept of nirvana. But nibbana, which literally means to cool off, is the word we use to describe or name something we cannot describe, because it is not of this conditioned world. So vijnana, the 5th of the 5 khandhas, sense consciousness that you refer to here, consciousness, in the khandhas is that which recognize all conditioned things, which are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. So including this physical body and thinking brain. All impermanent, they won't last. All unsatisfactory, cause us suffering, and they're not within our control. There's no self element to them. But the mind, the heart mind, if you like, I think I just spoke about it in the last talk, the citta is that which we can condition through this living experience. We can condition it, but through good behavior as we can through bad behavior in terms of its direction and momentum. However, it is not like nibbana, it is not of this conditioned world. So therefore it is affected by, but not of. And it is that is given to rebirth into nibbana, once having attained to parinibbana. That is arahantship, having cut all ties to this living in this realm, this lifetime, this existence. But once again, please watch that talk, because I just deal with it solely, that subject matter. I think it's a few months ago, 4 months ago. I just looked it up, but I haven't watched the talk. So let me know if there's anything more, having watched that talk, that I can elaborate on. But it's quite simple. We're not talking about vijnana, sense consciousness, which indeed dies along with the senses. We're talking about the citta, the heart mind, that has no location, no physical place. Have you ever experienced the universe speaking to you directly in deep meditation? I missed a question there. No. Have I ever experienced the universe speaking to you directly in deep meditation? No, I haven't. Interesting. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Multitasking is not mindfulness. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark. If you can do two things at once mindfully, that is having mindfulness on each of the tasks you're carrying out, maybe that could be having mindfulness of the breath whilst sweeping. That is multitasking. So it is not necessarily not mindfulness. What is not mindfulness is if you're sweeping and you're thinking about what you were doing this morning or yesterday, or you're thinking about what you're going to do this afternoon or tomorrow. That is thinking about other things and letting your mind wander into many chains of thought rather than having mindfulness on the task in hand. Say having mindfulness anchored on the breath whilst you're sweeping could possibly help you stop doing that, having your mind wander into the past or into the future, keeping it in the present moment, here and now, anchored to the bodily action of breathing in, breathing out, whilst sweeping. So it isn't a case of multitasking being not mindful, but as you probably know, as you're running around busy in your busy lives, you are often doing many things at once, whilst listening to your podcast or listening to the radio in the background. Maybe the television has the news on in one corner of the room, your wife's speaking to you about something else in another corner of the room, you're running to look for your papers, your mobile phone, your keys for the car, or all of these things going on at the same time. This is multitasking, and to some extent overall you can be doing that mindfully, well, carefully, but you're not really developing mindfulness in the sense of samasati, right mindfulness. That is, having the power of concentration, which comes as a result of practicing samadhi, right concentration, samadhi in sitting meditation, to really give everything that you're doing 100% attention without your mind being distracted by other things that are going on. Then you develop the skill to be equanimous in all that you do. So when there are distractions and everything that's going on around you, you can focus well on what it is, the task in hand, what you need to be focused on, as opposed to letting your mind wander out or be dragged out to what is calling it, what is distracting you from careful attention in what you're doing. Do you recite any blessings or parita after accepting food? This was referring to the pindapata almsround video that's here on the channel. Sometimes I'll chant a short blessing when someone has offered the food, if they indicate they wish me to do so. So they don't ask or say anything in particular or do anything in particular, but having offered food, often they might kneel down, put their hands in Anjali, something like this, and then I'll give a short blessing because I think that's perhaps what they're used to. It isn't entirely what I would choose to do. I would choose to go about alms round without doing or saying anything. But I think one has to adapt and adjust in accordance with the culture that you're surrounded by, and give people what they feel comfortable with in order that they can really enjoy the experience of developing generosity, dana, and feel at home, feel comfortable with doing that. So yes, when it's appropriate, I offer a short blessing. Sometimes when the man who collects the money and gives the tickets on the bus stops the bus, jumps off the bus out in front of me and throws something in my bowl, I wouldn't stop him and all the many people on the bus and hold them up by insisting that they have some kind of blessing chant or listen to a parita. No. Or sometimes people maybe jump off their scooter and still have their helmet on and are clearly wanting to just go about their business. you use a little bit of mindfulness, a bit of common sense, and as is appropriate. More often than not, it's a short blessing involved. People have time. And it's a pleasure to do so. I've tried to count and always lost count, but I do have on Pindapata or on almsround, what would you call them, engagements, but meet probably 30 to 40 people each day who put something in my bowl. About half of those, probably maybe 2/3 of those, I will say a very short blessing. Okay, it's difficult to feel engaged with any discussion of Dharma when dukkha is misunderstood as suffering. Suffering is part of life, and much like ego, it can't be removed by any means. Trying to do so is like a cat chasing its tail, or an Ouroboros. I don't know what an Ouroboros is, I'm afraid, but I certainly know what a cat chasing its tail might look like. Dukkha, it specifically means, when translated from the Pali word dukkha, slightly off center. So like the hub of a wheel is the do, and the car is off center, something like that. So the wheel would roll along, blub, 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 unsatisfactorily. So it is usually considered to mean suffering. Dukkha means sad in the Sinhalese language, and it's quite a good word for sad. But suffering is just, there. It's part of life, yes, as you say. But why are you finding it difficult to engage with discussions on Dharma when dukkha is misunderstood as suffering? It's not misunderstood as suffering, that's the word we use to describe suffering. And it is the Four Noble Truths. There is dukkha, the cause of dukkha, an end of dukkha, and the path leading to the end of dukkha. Without that, there really are not the teachings of the Buddha. So you might be referring to something entirely different to Buddhism here, but we do strive not to end suffering, but to see suffering for what it is, impermanent, as well as it being unsatisfactoriness, but not self. It isn't what we are. Life is suffering, but we're looking to become free from suffering in this lifetime, and therefore free and free from rebirth into future lifetimes to experience more suffering by cutting off the kilesas, the cause of suffering. The root causes of our suffering are really desire, which are summed up as greed, hatred, and delusion, not understanding about suffering and its cause. So this is the nature of Buddhism. This is what we're talking about here. Maybe listen to a few more of the talks and you'll hear that come up time and time again. It's not a misunderstanding of dukkha. You're spelling it differently, so maybe you mean an entirely different thing. But dukkha, dukkha in the Pali language is usually translated as suffering or unsatisfactoriness. And that is really just a word we're using to explain the natural phenomenon condition of life itself. So you agree with that. So I'm not really sure what's difficult or what the problem is there. Okay. Right. I don't think this next question, I'm going to skip that. I've just read it for the second time and it doesn't appear to be directed at me. Or maybe it is. I'll just go towards the end a little bit. It says, funny, so you say you're not an arahant. Are you trying to be? So yeah, I probably said I'm not an arahant, because if I was an arahant, I'd be fully cut the ties of greed, hatred, and delusion. I think it's a slight misunderstanding, because a couple of comments have come up about this. I said I'm not an arahant. I would have thought that, now I've said it, perhaps I've said it twice now, and it might open another whole can of worms. Arahantship is fully enlightened, and an arahant is a fully enlightened being. It's the ultimate attainment in this practice. It is the state the Buddha had to attain to, and therefore became known as the Buddha because he was awakened, fully enlightened. But being as he was the first to have established that since previous Buddha sasanas, so there was no Buddhism when the Buddha became enlightened, and therefore became Sammasambuddha, Buddha, perfectly enlightened. He had no teacher, but we have the Buddha and his teachings to follow. And we strive to attain arahantship too, which is freedom from suffering in this lifetime and no further rebirth into samsara. Once having attained that, on death, you attain to parinibbana, so final nibbana. You'll never be reborn again. You will have to, before that, go through 3 other stages of enlightenment: sotapanna, anagami, sakadagami. Sakadagami, anagami. These are stream entry, non-returner, once returner, and then fully awakened, or arahantship. Finally, so we're looking at a very highly attained state of enlightenment for anyone to achieve, and there are probably very few people alive or whom we would come across and meet at any given point in time that have that degree of attainment. So one can safely assume that that is the case for most people. But yeah, this is what we are trying to aspire to. But we're not discounting the fact that we need to aspire to being free from any belief in rites and rituals, to have no doubt in the Buddha's teachings, to understand perfectly and be free from personality view, Sakkaya Ditthi, that is a pure understanding of not self, the workings of karma in terms of what we can take on board in terms of our own actions of body, speech and mind, knowing that their results will be, we will be the beneficiaries of, and all of this that goes about needing to be achieved in order to attain to the first level of enlightenment, which again is quite an attainment in itself, none of which are going to come about without deep levels of absorbed meditation coming from samadhi, leading to jhanas, this deep experience of meditation where we are secluded from the hindrances and therefore much of what we're experiencing in this existence, to see clearly the nature of that existence. So we're looking at a very highly attained state. And then you go on to say, what do you think it would take for you to get there? Well, this is what the Buddha teaches us in the Noble Eightfold Path. You keep the precepts, in the case of lay people, 5 precepts, for a bhikkhu, 227. And you practice meditation and you develop wisdom. And if you keep practicing in that way, then maybe within this life you can attain to arahantship. We all can. Would you have to immerse yourself even more deeply into Buddhist practice? If you're referring to me, then I think as a bhikkhu you can really immerse yourself in this lifetime only as deeply as this. Now, of course, it doesn't mean to say that all monks, all nuns, all bhikkhus, all bhikkhunis are always diligently practicing, which is why I think I set out to say we should be reflecting upon that continuously. How well have we been spending our time? And this is what we do as a reminder to bring ourselves back on track, to follow that Noble Eightfold Path. But yes, the ordained life of a renunciant is as deeply as you can go and be supported in that practice to try and attain to arahantship. Or do you see it more as a natural process that you are already engaged with and will happen on its own? Or do you not see it as a goal? So certainly it's an attainment we strive towards So you could call that a goal. And with that practice as prescribed by the Buddha, it is a natural progression, yes, through those stages of meditation, those stages of enlightenment, the first being the most significant, the second and third being gradual reductions in greed or wanting, desire, in hatred or aversion, not wanting, and ultimately to having no greed, no ill will, no greed, no hatred, and being fully awakened, seeing fully and clearly the characteristics of existence, and experientially through meditation, having experienced seclusion from the hindrances, seclusion from physical feelings, mental proliferation or thinking even, emotions, a glimpse of Nibbana whilst still living in this form and existing in this way, still experiencing right up until Parinibbana, your final death, suffering. The Buddha too experienced suffering. He often referred to in his talks that his back was paining him, he must retire, and for Ananda, his right-hand man, to take over from him. And this is evident right up until his parinibbana, because we're still attached to this physical body which experiences pain, which is suffering. So whether that was directed at me or someone else, I mean, it's hopefully helpful. I thought right mindfulness when going about day-to-day life, I think it's better without these, included the sila component, being mindful of avoiding harm, mindfulness of intention, letting go of negative, unhelpful thoughts, speech and actions, and cultivating positive ones. So I thought right mindfulness. So right mindfulness, I've just explained, right mindfulness, and sila is moral virtue. The Noble Eightfold Path can be divided into three categories. You're mixing up there a little bit the precepts or the moral virtue stages or sections of the Noble Eightfold Path with the overall Noble Eightfold Path, and with the specific section of the Noble Eightfold Path referring to Samma-Sati, right mindfulness. So what you have in the Noble Eightfold Path are right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, which can be divided into three categories. Sila, of which those are four, half of the Noble Eightfold Path, right intention, and you're saying here about intention, right speech, and you're mentioning about speech, that's part of the Noble Eightfold Path relating to sila, right action, right livelihood, that's four parts of the Noble Eightfold Path relating to sila. But sila itself is a governor of mindfulness, in that if we're keeping all five precepts, we are naturally mindful of everything we're doing in terms of actions of our body, our speech, and what we think about. Actions of body, speech, and mind. That's the point of the five precepts, to keep our actions of body, speech, and mind within the parameters of that Noble Eightfold Path. So you're blurring the subjects together, two lists, if you like, together into one. So you're not thinking wrongly. But just for clarification, you keep five precepts: no killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants. And those are expanded upon in the four sections within the Noble Eightfold Path. In addition to which, there is the establishment of, through Samma-Sati, right mindfulness, and Samma-Samadhi, right concentration, and Samma-Vidya, right effort, preceding those two, the establishment of good meditation. And that will result in having good mindfulness and good concentration, meditation, will result in wisdom, panya, which is right view. So the Noble Eightfold Path begins with right view, panya, wisdom, which is knowing the characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self, knowing that karma, what we do, we will will affect us. Good, we'll get good. Bad, we'll get bad. Karma and vipaka, actions and their results. And that there is rebirth if we are not freed from that within this lifetime by cutting off those causes of all of our problems, those defilements, those kilesas in the Pali word of greed, hatred and delusion, lobha, dosa, moha. So this is right view. So that's just one point, but a very important part of the Noble Eightfold Path within those three categories. Sila is the precepts or the moral virtue aspect of it. Samadhi is the meditation. Panya, the wisdom, right view. That is the practice. That's what we do here. That's what we're trying to do. And it incorporates mindfulness. It isn't just mindfulness, it's just keeping an eye on the precepts. It's all of our actions of body, speech and mind, and mindful of everything going on around us. We call sati, mindfulness, sampajana, everything, mindfulness of everything, or mindfulness of all that's going on around us and what we're doing. Okay, what is the blackboard behind you? What is it for? We've answered that, I think, in the last talk. This, if you zoom in, you can read it for yourself. It's not for any particular reason, it's just there for want of somewhere else for it to be, and it has some, hopefully, maybe useful information to direct you to the right place for information, rather than me repeating it over and over again. Like where my email address is, or what my name is, and things like that, and where am I from. They're all in the channel description, which is what that board says. Perhaps not clearly enough, but there we are. So, you have often mentioned that you should meditate for at least an hour at a time. I've noticed that I can only meditate for 25 minutes at a time. I meditate 2 to 3 times a day like this. Is this the same thing to meditate, for example, for an hour a day, but in 2 to 3 parts? So yeah, you meditate for as long as you're comfortable with. I suggest an hour because that's something good to aim for at the beginning. And one should try and meditate in the morning when you're free to do so. The reason I say you're free to do so, you may all think you're busy in the morning, but if you get up an hour earlier, you've got a free hour. As in, at the end of the day, if you go to sleep an hour later, you've got a free hour there. You might only be able to meditate for 10 minutes in that time. And so I'm not saying there's any prescribed amount or time constraints to meditation. If you have the opportunity to meditate several times through the day, or a few times a day, like you say, 2 to 3 times a day, that's even better. So if you're meditating in the morning, at lunchtime and in the evening, for example, that's great. But if you're sitting down for 20 minutes, getting up and then sitting down for 20 minutes, then getting up and then sitting down for 20 minutes, all within 1 hour of the day, then that's not quite the same as sitting for the whole hour, if you can. But if that's all you can do, that's also good. But try and sit a little bit longer each time, maybe extending it to 30 minutes, and then getting up and maybe practicing walking meditation, just back and forth, and then sitting again for another 30 minutes, rather than trying to be too mindful of the time. Don't get too constrained or het up about timing. You might need to set a timer to tell you when you have to finish meditation, but that's all. Your eyes shouldn't be looking at anything, let alone the clock. Your mind shouldn't be thinking about time, it should be experiencing the timeless, ultimately. So you might need a timer to bring you out of that situation if you have duties and responsibilities in your day. But it's entirely up to you. Whatever you can do and what do you find beneficial? If you're finding it beneficial to meditate in 3 sections rather than one long one, then that's good. But reflection regularly on how you are practicing with regards to sila, with regards to your regularity of meditation, and how is it affecting you in terms of your behavior towards others, in your reactions towards circumstances and conditions that surround you. How have you improved over the last month or not, as the case may be, or have you deteriorated since you began your practicing? I say month, but it could be over the last week, over month, years, decades even. Are you progressing towards a more peaceful and relaxed state of mind? Are you developing more loving kindness, compassion? Are you developing joy for others, not jealousy and envy of others? Are you developing equanimity? Are these qualities building within you as a result of your practice? It's overall, this is the Noble Eightfold Path, but specifically with regards to meditation, the time you have spare that you can allocate towards meditation, then this, whatever you can do, the more the better. Because in this time, you are really sitting and focusing on your practice of allowing the mind to just naturally become calm and still and peaceful and absorb into a nice and rejuvenating, renovative state of mind that will give you have so much more of a restorative effect on you than you get out of just sleeping and lazing around. So this is the benefits of it. This is why you can use it to some extent to replace a little bit of that sleep, of which most people have a bit too much of. Most people eat too much, speak too much, and sleep too much. Now, I'm not making that as an accusation, just look at your own activities. Now, we're taught as monks to try and eat little, speak little, and sleep little, for a very good reason. Those actions are not conducive towards peaceful states of mind, and they are feeding the kilesas, the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion. As opposed to being more restrained in those activities, being mindful of how much we're consuming, what we're talking about and how much we're talking and how long we're sleeping for, is conducive certainly towards attaining our goal of being free from cutting those kilesas off at the root, those kilesas of greed, hatred and delusion. Would I consider making a playlist of aspects and considerations of the 8 precepts of the Eightfold Path? So I think there's a bit of a mix-up with 8 precepts and Eightfold Path there again, which I've kind of just explained in relation to the usual 5 precepts. 8 precepts are for people who want to just practice a little more earnestly on maybe one day a week or once a month, usually the full moon day, the Uposatha day in Buddhism, but it could be on a Sunday or a weekend day when you have free time. And you just avoid eating in the afternoon, entertainment, beautification and lazing around on comfortable furniture, in addition to your normal 5 precepts. That is supportive of those 5 precepts. As far as playlists are concerned, these talks are in playlists. Dharma talks, questions and answers, and some others. But they're the main 2, Dharma talks and questions and answers. And each of those Dharma talks, and each really of these comments that we talk about or answers, my sharing with you here, is in relation to the Noble Eightfold Path. I couldn't make a separate playlist separately only for the Noble Eightfold Path. Everything I say is in relation to the Noble Eightfold Path because that's all I do. That's all I have at my disposal of information I can share with you is the Noble Eightfold Path and my experience of that. So hopefully this is the playlist, all of them. But I see kind of it's nice to organise things. It is organised to some extent if you go into playlists. But what you're then going on to say is, I would like to learn more about the second. I would like to learn more. Oh, right, okay. The second question is, as an expat in Asia who is monolinguistic and not particularly gifted in linguistics, how do you go about joining a monastery where you can actually understand the Dharma talks? Well, so I'm an English person, or an English-speaking person living in Asia, and I don't speak any other languages either. And how do you go about finding a monastery where you can actually understand the Dharma talks? You don't. You can listen to Dharma talks, read Dharma talks as a layperson, by which any means that is most convenient to you, I would suggest, and in your own language. If you're staying in a monastery, you're going there to practice. So you're going there to practice what you've learned from those Dharma talks. I wouldn't suggest anybody goes to live in a monastery. Well, they can. You can go and live in a monastery where they don't speak your language, and you will only practice, but you won't be going there with the intention to listen to Dharma talks. That's not to say you won't learn an awful lot, because you'll learn more by practicing the Dharma than listening to it. But it's as well to have a grounding in the Dharma before going to such a place. Otherwise you might feel very confused and uncomfortable. Ultimately, however, if you were to just sit alone in a kuti in the jungle, in the forest, for months on end and not listen to anything, but have ordinary daily interactions with members of the Sangha without speaking, you're going to be observing noble silence through there being no choice other than to do so. And I chose that option because I find it very difficult not to speak. And in that sense, found being in a monastery where I couldn't speak the language was conducive. It helped my practice because I was unable to speak to anybody. You are then able to just concentrate on the practice. Questions will come up and you might want to ask. But if you're patient, if you're developing khanti, patience and endurance, those questions will resolve and answer themselves. The Buddha says that. You don't need to be seekers going here, there and everywhere to the ends of the universe. All of the answers of the meaning of life even are within this fathom-length body, this bag of skin and bones and horrible things. It's all there if you sit and meditate. So you're going to a monastery, that's great if you can, but you're not going there to listen to the Dharma, unless it happens to be one in your own country or a monastery whereby they are of your own nationality and speaking your own mother tongue. But that's often not the case. You might find going to such places also, you'd be less inclined to practice and it would be more of an intellectual learning exercise than one of a deep immersion in the practice, which is really the point of going to a monastery. So if you're wanting to take the 8 precepts and go and stay in the monastery for the day, you're going there to just practice, not to listen to Dharma. Take the 8 precepts when you arrive, Tisarana Atta Sila, that is refuge in the triple gem, and the 8 precept, and then go and meditate until it's time for you to leave the next morning. And that's what you do. You sit, you walk, you sit, you walk, you sleep little, eat little, and you leave the next day thoroughly refreshed and having practiced to the best of your ability for 24 hours. So don't worry too much about language. Language is a hindrance. It really is. The least we speak, the better. Most of my talks here and what we're talking about, or a lot of them, are really just because of a little bit of misunderstanding over the one translation of a word to another translation of a word. For instance, dukkha, a little bit earlier we were talking about. You know, this is all unnecessary. We know in our own mother tongues that we're suffering, otherwise we wouldn't be on YouTube looking for an answer to that. And if you see someone on YouTube whom is representative of something that is available to you also, a way of life that is available to you also, that is by example showing you an alternative way, then you can listen to it. It isn't a case of necessarily thinking, I know better because I've seen this other alternative on YouTube. You can go and try for yourself and experience for yourself and see exactly what it is that works for you. This is what is important. And this is also what the Buddha is teaching us to do. He gives us the guidelines, the parameters, the Noble Eightfold Path, and then go and practice and see for yourself. Do you get to visit other monasteries? If so, who decides where and when, how long, who pays for the transportation? I'm wondering, is it possible for a monk to periodically travel to different monasteries? So each and every monk, it's up to them. And I've been to a few different monasteries within my own group, my own Sangha in India, and the lay supporters of that Sangha usually provide transportation or indeed pay for that the provision of that transportation if and when it's necessary. You really, though, only ever really go anywhere if you're instructed to do so by your teacher, or you're invited to go somewhere by perhaps lay practitioners because it's difficult for them to come to you. So you just go with the flow. We don't sit down and say, I want to be a monk who goes visiting lots of monasteries. That wouldn't be being a monk. That would be a person who goes visiting lots of monasteries. We come to a monastery, we ordain to practice, and that is it. And the practice is the Noble Eightfold Path. If that entails, because of instructions that are given to us, or requirements that are requests that are made of us, then we might need to travel, and in which case, lay people would provide for that means for you to enable you to get there. But other than that, we try to really stay put and focus on our practice. This is the objective of ordination. This is the point of being a monk. I have to periodically travel for visa reasons. There's one of those trips coming up soon, but I've managed to get it to the very bare minimum of travel and expense and time. So I'm not away for here for any more than the day. And by that means, it's got it down to the most convenient way of achieving its end goal, which is simply to just cross a border or leave the country and come back again, which is what one has to do often as a foreigner if you're in another country every so often. In some countries that isn't so easy. Hence, I'm not in India because I can only be in India for 6 months in any 1 year. This is the way it is. And I don't want to be traveling. So to be there for 6 months and then have to go and live somewhere else, find somewhere else, start all over again another time, every time I've used up my 6 months in any one calendar year, then it will be most disruptive to my practice. So I choose to just stay here where that isn't the case. And I can literally just pop back to India very quickly and return all within 24 hours every 6 months. But it doesn't involve visiting, doing, or anything other than just experiencing the excursion. But it's by no means, it's not a problem, it's not a pleasure. I'm indifferent to it now. It's a kind of automated procedure that happens every 6 months or so. But a necessity, and one must abide by, all cultural, apart from cultural traditions relating to Buddhism, we must abide by laws of the land. When in Rome, do as the Romans. It's, socially unacceptable for anybody to try and, beat systems or change things or get involved in such. But especially as monks, we want to be invisible and problem-free, not cause anybody any difficulties. So it's fortunate that I have sufficient support that enables me to do that, and therefore stay here. When I say here in Sri Lanka, rather than finding anywhere else. But this would be the case anywhere. And there are provisions in place underway, I will say, to change the arrangement I currently have here anyway, by way of getting a different kind of visa or something like that. So, now this next comment is about, on that subject really, convention. I won't read the whole comment because it gives lots of examples. You'll notice when I pronounce certain Pali words, and especially in the chanting, we pronounce the letter V as a W. So Bhagawa, not Bhagava. And this contributor, what's the word? Commentator, contributor, someone, the author of this comment here, has kindly given me lots of examples, but I think that's sufficient. So in the Indian language, as you quite rightly point out, Burmese language and Sri Lankan language, not always though in the Sri Lankan language, but often in these languages, the letter V is pronounced W, wa. You could say that V is pronounced softly, like W, whereas W, so double V, is more acute and pronounced V. So very often in these places, W is pronounced V, V is pronounced W. But this is just a mere convention of pronunciation. It isn't that important. But you've taken the time to make a very long comment about this because you state you are English. So why not pronounce letters normally? Why do you insist on mispronouncing Pali words like the Indians, Sri Lankans, Burmese? Now I must take exception to that. What is normal when the majority of the population of the world using those languages pronounces the letter V, W? I would say that is normal. Just because a few, and it's in terms of billions here we're talking, only a few billion pronounce it V as opposed to W, that isn't necessarily normal. It might be normal for us, but that isn't the issue at stake here. The reason I, as an English person, pronounce those letters the way I do and say Bhagawa instead of Bhagava is because I'm used to chanting within the Sangha. And I'm used to being a member of a Sangha of many other monks, a few other monks, or indeed with lay people whose native tongue originates from this Pali language or languages similar to that, where that is their common pronunciation. So if I'm talking to or chanting with a number of other people pronouncing a particular letter a certain way, I think it is only polite that I adopt their own convention and chant in the same way. So if I was to chant Bhagava, and I have quite a loud voice, over and above all those participating who are chanting Bhagawa, I would consider that to be trying to stand out, very rude, impolite, inconsiderate, and downright ignorant, frankly, even to think that I knew better about their own language and pronunciation of their mother tongue. But I do try my best, where possible, for sake of clarity, to pronounce all Pali words phonetically without accent, other than where required to do so. Where there might be an accent above an A, we pronounce the A elongated, ah, as opposed to ah. Similarly, in the Sinhalese language, they use the same accent, a straight line above the A. I've forgotten what it's called. Like a cedilla under a C in French, we don't pronounce, just because we're English, garçon. We don't say garçon in the restaurant in Paris. We say garçon. Yes? If we wanted to be pretentious and ignorant, we might say garçon. This is convention of speech. We shouldn't get all embroiled and all tied up in finicky little aspects of language. We're talking about here a common practice amongst us all. And by very far, if you take the population of Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and I will say this is the same pronunciation in Thailand also, and India, pronouncing Pali words daily as a matter of course, not only in chanting, not only in Buddhist terminology, but within their own languages. Like I said, dukkha is sad in Sinhalese, and many of the Thai words are derivatives of the Pali also, as is Sinhalese. Not sure about Burmese, I don't know. But those billions and billions of people making up a huge percentage, the majority in fact, that is greater than the population of even China, if you include India, that pronunciation of V pronounced W, I think it's only fair to say that that is the norm on this earth, on this planet. That is quite normal. And to try and put yourself above that, I think is inappropriate and wrong. Because the majority, I have to say, wins in this case. So that is why you even go on to say some other examples. It's evang, not evang, etc. Blah, 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 blah. For some reason, Indians pronounce V as W, and it seems others around them do as well. But why do you do it? So I would suggest because they're right and we're wrong. I'm quite happy to accept that. But there's no right, there's no wrong. It's just a matter of convention. We pronounce lots of English words. I don't think you're necessarily from England, and English is not necessarily your native language, looking at your username, but I could be wrong. But even the Americans, tomato, tomato, potato, potato, we have these conventions of speech that you can, if you want to stand out and I would say make a fool of yourself, you can be firm on where you come from. But even within my own country, in different places, people say things, pronounce things differently. Grass, grass, glass, glass, for example, are very common, and only a matter of miles, a few miles, can differentiate between those pronunciations. But commonly, over a huge part of the world, V is pronounced W. And I think it would be impolite for me or any other individual in company of those to pronounce it otherwise. So I hope I've not gone off the boil there and got all angry again sounding, but the comments stood out from the way it's been typed, and with the big letters to make it very clear. I'm just making it very clear in response, and thanking you for your comment. Okay, and the next one, on a lighter note, I think the time is up, isn't it? Oh, this is sort of continuing from what we've already spoken about. Given that you're not enlightened, aren't you likely to be doing more harm than good answering people's questions? Wouldn't it be better to refer people to listen to videos, books of those who are enlightened, like Ajahn Chah or Ajahn Sumedho, for example? I often do. I refer you to the suttas, the word of the Buddha. Begin with the Majjhima Nikaya and then read them all. And this is the awakened one, our teacher. And I only refer to the teachings of the Buddha in what I am sharing with you. And I think it will be very hard to find in any forum or media content like YouTube or living today available arahants to teach us. We're all reliant on Kalyanamita, similarly minded, noble practitioners doing our best to become enlightened and helping each other along that path by sharing with each other our own experiences. Now, I may or I may have not met enlightened beings or monks, let's say, in my time living in different places, in different monasteries. It's neither here nor there. I've also met many people whom have shared experiences with me that may not be enlightened, but their experiences and that sharing of has been of great and immense assistance to my own practice and helped me see things clearly that I might not have seen clearly if I hadn't encountered them, or their teachings indeed. So one cannot rely on being taught by arahants alone. The Buddha did not say this. He said to go out and share the Dharma, not to proselytize, not to be evangelical and try and convert, but when questioned, when asked, to give an answer, a fair and honest answer based on your own experience. But we can also anchor that and have the caveat of, but you should read this particular sutta or refer to what the Buddha has to say on that particular subject. Or, yes, in the case of where there is a book available of a Thai forest tradition master who wouldn't necessarily purport to having attained to arahantship himself, nor indeed would any arahant feel it necessary to do so, but it could be by us, mere mortal souls, be interpreted as such, have that information available in written form or in teachings, in recorded Dharma talks. But if that was all that was available, it would be very limited indeed. Also, there would be no forum for such a questions and answers interaction as this. And if that is indeed your wish and you prefer that that was not the case, then of course there are other means at your disposal. But I would say the first port of call in that sense is always the suttas and the teachings, the word of the Buddha and his noble disciples, because they were arahants. And this is always whom I and other teachers, I'm not a teacher, I'm just sharing my own experiences as a Buddhist monk, but other Buddhist monks and other teachers as such are referring to those teachings. That is in Buddhism. So, given that you are not enlightened, aren't you likely to be doing more harm than good, answering people's questions? If I thought I was doing harm, I wouldn't answer these questions or give my perspective or view on them, because that would be intentionally doing harm, causing harms to others. And that would not be in accordance with my practice. So you're asking the question, aren't you? So I don't think I am, no. But if anybody considers that what I have to say here is by any way misleading, confusing, or harmful to others, then you can certainly let me know. But I only refer to the teachings of the Buddha. And by that, I can very simply say that we're only here talking about the Four Noble Truths and the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. Anything else that comes about is by the way, and by way of interaction with each other, a conversation that we're having, albeit a little one way, because I'm responding to comments in the only way I know how in this format. But it goes continuously from day to day, and we're progressing together on that path, and I hope assisting each other. And towards that end, may you all progress happily on the path towards Nibbana. Until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.